After you went to the moon, you immediately took a shower, for the same reasons you take one after a haircut. But there wasn't much more to do here. She finished the last few strokes of the notations in the environmental impact statement and stood up, rubbing her back and checking her work for spelling errors. It was all in order. But that hissing. She sat down again, feeling nervous. Facility with this speech, as with any other language, increases with time. After several months of working in a sort of pidgin speech, Nita was finally beginning to think in it, and the results were sometimes upsetting. Once upon a time, it had been quiet on the moon when she visited, but no more. Her more accustomed mind heard a sound in the darkness now, a low, low sound, like a breath being let out, and out forever. The astronomer part of her knew what it was, the so-called 4-degree radiation that was all that was left of the universe's birth. Normally, only radio telescopes set to the right frequency could hear it, but Nita wasn't normal. Nor was the sound just a sound to her. In it, she could hear the sound of consciousness, life, as plainly as she had used to be able to hear Kit think. That sensitivity had decreased over time, but this one was increasing, it seemed in the deep silence, by the minute. It upset her. Suddenly the universe, which had seemed so empty, now felt crammed full of powers and intelligences that might not need planets or bodies. And Dairine was out there in the middle of them, mucking around in her inimitable fashion. Nita found herself wishing that Kit would hurry up. She very much wanted to see that cheerful face, to hear at least his voice, if not his sassy, loud cast of thought, always with that slight Hispanic accent to it. Long time since we heard each other think. She had been wondering about that. Idly, she began flipping through the manual, turning pages, maybe the index. But the index did her no good. She couldn't think what heading to look under. "Come on," she muttered to the book. "Give me a hand here. I don't have all day." It was that hissing that was making her ill-tempered, she realized. A thought occurred to her, and she was glad she hadn't completely cleaned out her knapsack the other day. She reached into it and pulled out a tangle of cord and a pair of earphones and her Walkman. It was a Christmas present from her mother, the best of any present Nita had gotten last year, for she loved music and liked walking through her day with a soundtrack. Now she riffled through the pages of her manual, squinting at them in the pale earthlight, while Rock sang softly in the earphones. Diagrams. She skipped that whole section, not without another glance over at Kit's name scrawled in the motionless, powdery lunar dust. He was all there. At least he seemed to think so. It was mostly the description of himself he had carefully worked out. Of course, after their first few spells, Nita had looked over his shoulder and suggested a couple additions to the data. His fondness for chocolate ice cream, which he had instantly admitted, and his craziness for poetry, especially Shakespeare, which embarrassed him and which he had refused to admit to for several days. The look on his face when Nita caught him reading The Tempest. Still, he admitted it, finally. She smiled a little then. He hadn't taken long to point out that her data said nothing about the fact that she devoured horse books one after another, or that he had once caught her with a long stick in hand, having an energetic sword fight with one of the trees in the vacant lot. And where is he? She sighed and glanced down at the pages that had fallen open in her hand. One of them said, "Wizards in the closest relationships, leading toward permanent partnership, usually find that nonverbal communication becomes rare or difficult. Other conditions obtain for other species, but for human wizards, intimacy is meaningless without barriers to overcome and to lower. Wizards usually have little need for such in the early stages of their careers, but as this situation changes, as the wizard becomes more adept at accurate description in the speech, and therefore more adept at evaluating the people he or she works with, the wizard's mind typically adapts to the new requirements by gradually shutting out the person most..." Permanent partnership? No. Oh, no. Nita swallowed with a throat suddenly gone dry and slapped the book shut. For a moment she tried to do nothing but listen to the tape. It was something of journeys, their distinctive sweet keyboards and synthesizers, wistful, singing down toward silence. And then the vocal. Looking down, I watched the night running from the sun, orphan stars and city lights fading one by one. Oh, sweet memories, I call on you now. Of course, Nita thought, there is a lot of it going around school. Going steady, dating, pins and rings, all the silliness. Her mother had forbidden Nita to do any such thing, telling her she was much too young. Nita didn't mind. It all seemed dumb to her. Sometimes, seeing how crazed some of the other girls her age were over the boy question, she wondered if she was normal. She was too busy, for one thing. She had something more solid than going steady. When you were a wizard, with a partner. Oh, come on. It's not as if they're going to make you marry him or something. Look at Tom and Carl. They're just buddies. They work together because they enjoy doing it. But I don't want... She trailed off. She didn't know what she wanted. Nita put her head down in her hands, trying to think. No answers came, only more problems. Thoughts of Kit backing her up when she was terrified, cheering her up when she was annoyed. Kit being the solid, reliable voice in the other half of a spell, the presence on the far side of the circle, matching her cadence exactly for the fun and the challenge of it. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with having a best friend? He's a boy, that's what. It's changing. I'm changing. I'm scared. She gazed up through unending night, down at oncoming morning, and tried to work out what to do. Has he noticed this happening to him, too? And suppose he starts liking someone else better than me? Will he want to keep the team going? If only I knew what he was thinking. Then she let out a sad and annoyed breath. It's probably nothing, she thought. Everything is probably fine. Oh, so much is wasted, sang the earphones, and oh, so little used, but the trick of the dreamer is keeping yourself from the blues. Ha, Nita thought, I wish it were that simple. And the voice that sang cried out at her, so sudden and defiant that she sat erect with startlement. Everyone's a hero if you want to be. Everyone's a prisoner holding their own key, and every step I take, every move I make, I'm always one step closer. I don't mind running alone. It was Steve Perry's fierce, clear voice, uplifted in almost angry encouragement, hitting the chorus hard. He went on, singing something about children and concrete canyons, but Nita was still full of that startlement and hardly heard. Even Dayreen, she thought. There's some job out there that only she can do. She had not thought of it in this light before, and the thought of Dayreen as a hero staggered her and annoyed her for a moment. Her? The runt? But then Nita felt ashamed. What had she been herself not more than a few months ago? Basically a coward, afraid of everything, including herself, friendless, quiet, and smart, but with no one to do any good for by being so. Things were different now, but who was she to deny Dayreen her chance at being more than she had been? And every step I take, every move I make, I'm always one step closer. And if she can do that, Nita thought after a moment, I can sure ask Kit what he thinks about things. A sudden movement off to one side brought Nita's head around with a snap. In utter silence, silvery white dust was kicking up in a vague pale cloud from where a tall man in a polo shirt and shorts was standing. Tom bounced over to where Nita sat, being careful of his footing. Nita admired the way he bounced. He had obviously had a lot of practice at the kangaroo hop that works well in low gravities. He paused not too far from Nita to let her shield spell recognize his and allow it to infringe, then sat down beside Nita on the boulder, casting an analytical eye over her spell diagram. Very neat, he said. Nice structure. Carl has been contaminating you, I see. Thanks. Kit just called me, Tom said, brushing dust off himself. He'll be up in a few. He's just settling things with his folks. I'm going to be talking to them later. Tom smiled wearily. This seems to be my night. Yeah. More silvery dust kicked up, closer and to the right. There was Kit, with his knapsack over his back, and Pichu on one shoulder. All set, he said to Tom. He looked at Nita and said, They hollered a lot, but I think my dad is proud. Mom seems pretty calm about it. Then he laughed, a little wickedly. My sisters are in shock. Can't say that I blame them. Nita got up, dusting herself off. Okay, Tom said. I wanted to see you two off up here because there's data you'll need that your parents don't. Something major is going on out there. Dairine is not going to run into just some bunch of lackeys for the lone power out there. That one itself is after her. But I have no indication why. And its power is oddly veiled at the moment, concentrated and hidden. I don't think this manifestation of the lone power is going to be as obvious as others have been recently. So find Dairine and look carefully at the situation. If it looks like she needs to be where she is, stay with her and do what you can for her. He paused. But you are going to have to be very careful. The lone one won't mind distracting her by striking at you two, or using her danger to sucker you into pulling her out of the problem she's intended to correct. Use your judgment. Save her if you can. And if we can't, Kit said. Tom looked at him sadly. See that the job gets done, he said. Whatever it is. They were all quiet. There's no telling what the stakes are on this one, Tom said. The looks of the situation may be deceiving, probably will. Can you take this job and do it? Don't go if you can't. If either of you isn't sure you can depend on yourself or on the both of you, I don't want you in this. Too much can go wrong. Kit looked at Nita, then back at Tom. It's cool, he said. Nita nodded. Tom looked at her. I know, he said. You're upset about her. All right, you'll have a while to shake down while you chase her. Meantime, Carl and I have sent word ahead through the network so that a lot of people will be expecting you. He smiled. You're going to find that the way wizards have to behave on Earth is the exception rather than the rule. Most of the major law enforcement bodies in this part of the galaxy routinely call wizards in for consultations, and they owe us a lot of favors. So don't be afraid to ask the authorities wherever you go for help. Odds are you'll get it. Okay, so get out of here, and good hunting. Thanks. Come here, Bird, Tom said to Pichu. Nita looked up in surprise, expecting an explosion. Pichu did not take orders. She was surprised to see the macaw clamber up onto Tom's arm and reach up to nibble his ear. Tom scratched her in the good place, on the back of the head, and she went vague in the eyes for a couple of minutes, then ruffled the neck feathers up and shook herself. You be careful, Tom said. I'll be fine, Pichu said, sounding cranky. Nita repacked her knapsack, slung it on, and flipped her manual open to the marked pages with the verbal supplement for the transit spell as Tom passed Peach back to Kit. She caught Kit's eye, stepped into the circle at the same time he did. Tom backed away. Slowly, and in unison, they began to read, and the air, trapped in their shield spells, began to sing the note ears sing in silence. As the spell threw them out of the solar system, Nita wondered whether she would ever see it again.